June 1944. A captured airfield somewhere in Germany. Oberleutnant Walter Wolfram, holder of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, a man with more than 100 aerial victories to his name, felt his pulse quicken as he walked toward the silver-skinned aircraft resting on the tarmac. The North American P-51 Mustang, the American fighter, now appearing over the Reich in ever-growing numbers, the machine cutting down his comrades at an alarming rate. Wolfram had been summoned by the Luftwaffe High Command. They wanted answers. What made this American aircraft so deadly? Where were its weaknesses? How could German pilots survive against it? What he would discover over the next few hours would permanently change how German fighter pilots approached the Mustang. But what unsettled his superiors was not his criticism. It was his admiration, and what that admiration revealed about how far the Luftwaffe had fallen in the struggle for air superiority. Walter Wolfram was no ordinary pilot. Born in May 1923 in Bavaria, he joined the Luftwaffe in February 1943 and was assigned to one of the most elite fighter wings in history, Jägerschwader 52. This was the unit that produced more aces than any other in aviation history. The wing where Erich Hartmann claimed 352 victories, where Gerhard Barkhorn achieved 301, where Gunther Rall reached 275, and Wolfram belonged among them. By the time he climbed into that captured Mustang, he had already established himself as one of the Luftwaffe's most precise fighter pilots. Post-war analysis of Soviet loss records would later show that his claims aligned with enemy losses with remarkable accuracy. Of his 137 victories, 119 were against fighters, not bombers. He was not a hunter of lumbering formations. He was a dogfighter. On May 30th, 1944, only weeks before this evaluation, Wolfram claimed 11 victories in a single day over the Ploiești oil fields. 11 aircraft destroyed, a double ace in a day. On July 16th, he did it again, shooting down 10 aircraft near Kamenka, northeast of Lviv. He flew the Messerschmitt Bf 109G. He knew every quirk of that machine, every strength, every flaw. He had been shot down 3 times, wounded 4 times, forced into 12 emergency landings. He had even sunk a Soviet gunboat. Few men on Earth understood aerial combat at his level. This was the expert chosen to evaluate Germany's greatest fear. The captured P-51 before him was part of a remarkable intelligence effort. Throughout the war, the Luftwaffe recovered crashed or force-landed Allied aircraft from German-controlled territory. These machines were repaired, repainted with German markings, and flown by a specialized evaluation unit known as Circus Rosarius. Formed in 1943 under the command of Theodore Rosarius, the unit's mission was twofold: evaluate captured Allied aircraft for strengths and weaknesses, and tour operational airfields demonstrating these machines to frontline pilots, teaching them how to defeat them in combat. Circus Rosarius flew everything the Allies sent over Germany: the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the Supermarine Spitfire, the de Havilland Mosquito, the Hawker Typhoon, and, of course, the Mustang. Several P-51s had been captured after crash landings. They were meticulously restored using salvaged parts, then repainted with German crosses and bright yellow undersides, tails, and noses to prevent friendly anti-aircraft fire. Each received a code beginning with T9. They toured from airfield to airfield, and elite pilots like Wolfram were given the chance to fly them. Now he climbed into the cockpit. His first impression struck him immediately: space. After thousands of hours inside the tight confines of the Bf 109, the Mustang's cockpit felt cavernous. In the 109, his shoulders brushed the sides. The cannon ran between his legs. Everything was compact, close, immediate. In the P-51, controls seemed farther away. The canopy arched wide above him. It felt unfamiliar, not inferior, alien. The reflexes that kept a pilot alive, the instinctive reach, the unconscious adjustment, suddenly had to be relearned. Wolfram later described the sensation himself. He admitted that while the P-51 was an excellent aircraft in performance and handling, it felt disconcerting after so many hours in the snug cockpit of the 109. Here was a man with over 100 victories openly acknowledging the Mustang's quality. He did not dismiss it. He respected it. That respect carried critical insight. American pilots enjoyed tremendous visibility from the Mustang's canopy. They had space to move, better situational awareness, greater comfort on long missions. German pilots needed to understand this psychological difference when facing them in combat. But the cockpit was only the beginning. When Wolfram pushed the throttle forward and the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin roared to life, his understanding of fighter performance shifted. The Merlin V-1650, a liquid-cooled V-12 producing roughly 1,500 horsepower, used a two-speed, two-stage supercharger that maintained power at altitudes where the Bf-109's Daimler-Benz engine began to fade. The supercharger engaged automatically. The mixture adjusted itself. Power was simply there, on demand. The P-51D could reach approximately 437 miles per hour. Its service ceiling approached 42,000 feet. Its climb rate, while not equal to the Bf-109 at lower altitudes, was more than sufficient for high-altitude escort work. And then Wolfram noticed something that seemed small, but was not. There were no oil leaks. For a German pilot who had endured brutal Eastern Front winters, where engines were hand-cranked to life in sub-zero darkness, and leaking oil could mean death behind enemy lines, this reliability was astonishing. Gunther Rall, who also flew captured Mustangs, later recalled the same detail. The P-51's engine ran clean. No leaks. Hundreds of hours, without the constant maintenance headaches German crews had come to accept as normal. This was not just engineering excellence. It was industrial superiority. While German mechanics struggled with dwindling parts and overworked engines, American factories were producing Mustangs at a rate exceeding 100 per week. Each one reliable, each one capable of flying deep into the Reich and back again. And as Walter Wolfram sat in the cockpit of that captured Mustang in June 1944, he understood something unsettling. The threat was not just the airplane, it was the system behind it. Precisely machined, each one virtually identical, each one capable of flying thousands of miles into the heart of the Reich. Gunther Rall continued his recollection. I was also very interested in the electrical starting switches, which we did not have. This made it very difficult starting our engines in the Russian winter. We had the inertia starter. The inertia starter required German ground crews to physically crank a flywheel by hand, building enough rotational energy to turn the engine over. It was exhausting labor, especially in brutal cold. Meanwhile, American pilots simply pressed a button. These were not combat characteristics. They were logistical advantages. And in a war of attrition, logistics determined everything. As Wolfram climbed and maneuvered through the German sky, he began to understand the Mustang's true secret. It was not only the engine, not only the cockpit, it was the wing. The North American engineering team, led by Chief Designer Edgar Schmud, had done something revolutionary. In cooperation with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, they designed the Mustang around a laminar flow wing. The NAA/NACA 45-100 series airfoil was shaped to maintain smooth, orderly airflow over a far greater portion of the wing before it became turbulent. In theory, this could reduce drag by 25 to 50% compared to conventional airfoils. In practice, the gains were smaller. Manufacturing imperfections, dirt, rain, battle damage, even insects, could disturb the laminar flow. But even without achieving its full theoretical promise, the wing gave the Mustang advantages Wolfram could feel immediately. The aircraft was slippery. It sliced through the air with a smoothness the Messerschmitt Bf-109 could not match. At speeds above 320 miles per hour, the P-51 was in its element. The controls remained responsive. The airframe felt stable, composed, confident. And the laminar flow wing possessed another advantage, one not fully appreciated at the time. By sheer serendipity, its shape also reduced drag as aircraft approached transonic speeds. The Mustang had what engineers would later call a superior transonic wing. Its critical Mach number, the point where compressibility effects began causing severe control issues, was higher than that of any frontline German fighter. The P-51's tactical Mach number was approximately 0.78. The Bf-109 and the Focke-Wulf FW-190 were closer to 0.75. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was around 0.71. The Lockheed P 38 Lightning trailed even lower, near 0.68. In combat, this difference mattered enormously. In a high-speed dive, both aircraft accelerating toward the sound barrier, the Mustang pilot could maintain control longer. His opponent would begin to experience buffeting, heavy controls, loss of elevator authority, possibly structural stress. At the high altitudes where escort fighters operated, typically 25,000 to 30,000 feet, this advantage could be decisive. Wolfram also tested the Mustang's turning performance. Here, the comparison was more balanced. Under certain conditions, the BF-109 could outturn the P-51, especially at lower speeds, where its automatic leading-edge slats deployed to preserve lift near the stall. But at higher speeds, the Mustang maintained energy better. Its heavier construction and stable controls allowed it to sustain fast turns without bleeding off momentum. Kurt Bühligen, one of the highest-scoring German aces on the Western Front, later summarized the contest bluntly. The BF-109 and FW-190 could outturn American fighters at low speeds. Their firepower was heavier, and their 20mm cannon packed a greater punch. True as far as it went, but it missed the essential point. None of that mattered if the P-51 simply refused to fight that kind of battle. American pilots understood their machine. They kept their speed high. They dove and zoomed. They exploited their superiority above 25,000 feet. Most importantly, they possessed time. The Mustang carried fuel for hours of combat. The BF-109 typically had perhaps 90 minutes of endurance. Endurance was the Mustang's ultimate weapon. What Wolfram reported was not merely technical data. It was strategic intelligence. The North American P-51 Mustang could escort bombers all the way to Berlin, all the way to the heart of the Reich, all the way to targets previously believed beyond the reach of American fighters. This transformed the air war. When the 8th Air Force had sent heavy bombers unescorted, losses had been catastrophic. On August 17, 1943, a raid on Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories cost 60 bombers. On October 14, another raid lost 60 more, the day the Americans called Black Thursday. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt and Lockheed P-38 Lightning escorts simply lacked the range. They turned back at the German border. The Luftwaffe waited beyond that line and attacked with impunity. The Mustang ended that sanctuary. With external drop tanks, a P-51D could fly roughly 1,650 miles. That was enough to escort bombers from England to Berlin, even to targets in eastern Germany, and return. On March 4, 1944, Mustangs escorted bombers to Berlin for the first time and came home with fuel remaining. The shock in German command circles was profound. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring is often quoted as saying that when he saw Mustangs over Berlin, he knew the war in the air was lost. This was the intelligence Wolfram delivered. The Mustang was not merely another enemy fighter. It was a system, performance, range, reliability, industrial production, combined into a single weapon. The Luftwaffe could no longer wait for American escorts to turn back. They were not turning back. They were coming all the way in. Tactical recommendations followed. Avoid prolonged engagements. Strike quickly and disengage. Use the BF-109's climb to escape vertically. Force combat to low altitude and low speed if possible. But these were tactical answers to a strategic dilemma. The Mustang was not invincible. German aces shot them down. Victories were claimed against them regularly. The problem was arithmetic. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force was sending hundreds of Mustangs over Germany on major missions. On massive raids against Berlin, more than 800 bombers were sometimes accompanied by nearly 1,000 fighters. The Luftwaffe inflicted losses, but it lost irreplaceable pilots in return. Under the new leadership of Major General James Doolittle, escort fighters were no longer tied closely to bomber formations. They were unleashed to hunt. They swept ahead of the bombers. They intercepted German fighters as they climbed. They strafed airfields. They pursued damaged aircraft to destruction. This changed the nature of the air war. It was no longer merely a contest over bomber formations. It became a relentless campaign to destroy the Luftwaffe itself. It was a war of attrition, a deliberate campaign to destroy the Luftwaffe's experienced pilots. And it was working. During Big Week in February 1944, a massive Allied offensive targeting German aircraft production, Mustang pilots cut down an estimated 17% of the Luftwaffe's seasoned fighter force in a single week of air combat. These were not losses Germany could replace. Aircraft production continued to rise, but trained pilots were dying faster than new ones could be prepared. By mid-1944, the average German fighter pilot entering combat often had barely 100 hours of flight time. His American opponent frequently had 400 or more. The difference showed. As 1944 progressed, P-51 victories increased while losses declined. The kill ratio tilted steadily in America's favor. Veteran German aces with hundreds of victories found themselves leading squadrons of frightened novices who survived days instead of months. Wolfram himself would survive barely. On July 16, 1944, the same day he claimed 10 victories, he was severely wounded. Months of convalescence followed. When he returned to combat in February 1945, assuming command of Staffel within Jägerschwader 52, the Luftwaffe he rejoined was a shadow of its former self. When the war ended on May 8, 1945, his unit was stationed at Duchbrod Airfield in Czechoslovakia. They surrendered to American forces. After several weeks in captivity, the entire wing was transferred to Soviet control. Wolfram, released early due to the severity of his wounds, avoided the long imprisonment many of his comrades endured. Some would not return home for a decade. Gunther Rall offered further perspective in interviews decades later. His assessment of the Mustang was strikingly candid. You could not fly the Bf-109 for 7 hours. The cockpit was too tight, too narrow. The P-51 cockpit was, for me, a great room. Just fantastic. From a man with 275 aerial victories, this was no small admission. Rall was not claiming the Mustang outturned the 109 at low speed or carried heavier guns. He was acknowledging something deeper. The North American P-51 Mustang was designed for the war America was fighting, long-range offensive operations deep inside enemy territory. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 was designed for something else: quick scrambles, short interceptions, rapid returns. It was a brilliant point defense interceptor. But by 1944, the war demanded endurance. Rall summarized the decisive factor simply: they flew for 7 hours, and we flew for 1 hour and 20 minutes. That makes quite a difference in aerial combat. 1 hour and 20 minutes against 7 hours. No amount of individual skill could overcome that mathematical reality. There was another dimension to Wolfram's evaluation, one that troubled his superiors even more. The Mustang represented a fundamentally different philosophy of aircraft design. German fighters were often precision instruments, engineered for peak performance, sometimes at the expense of ease of manufacture or maintenance. The Bf-109 was compact, extremely fast for its size, and highly capable, but cramped, difficult to produce, and increasingly hard to maintain as resources dwindled. The Mustang was designed from the outset for mass production and operational efficiency. Its wing, though aerodynamically advanced, was structurally simple: a trapezoidal platform with straight leading and trailing edges. This reduced manufacturing complexity and improved consistency, critical for achieving aerodynamic efficiency in large numbers. The airframe itself was modular: forward fuselage, center fuselage, rear fuselage, and 2 wing halves. Each section could be wired and plumbed before final assembly. Damaged aircraft could be repaired by replacing entire sections rather than painstakingly rebuilding individual components. North American aviation produced more than 15,000 Mustangs during the war. Over 8,000 were P-51D models alone, more than the total production of many other fighter types combined. German industry, battered by strategic bombing and starved of materials, could not match that scale. This was the larger lesson behind Wolfram's flight. The Mustang was not merely a superior fighter in certain categories. It was the embodiment of industrial power. Walter Wolfram survived the war with 137 victories, 119 against fighters. He became the 74th Luftwaffe pilot to surpass 100 victories and received the Knight's Cross in July 1944. Wounded 4 times, forced down 12 times, He had endured nearly everything aerial combat could inflict. After the war, he returned to the skies as an aerobatic pilot, winning the German National Aerobatics Championship in 1962 and placing highly in multiple other competitions. He died in 2010 at the age of 87. Gunther Rall joined the post-war West German Air Force in 1956 and eventually rose to lieutenant general, serving as inspector of the Air Force in the 1970s. He died in 2009 at age 91. Both men lived long enough to reflect on what they had witnessed. Both acknowledged that by 1944, the Luftwaffe was fighting against overwhelming material superiority. The Mustang went on to become one of the most celebrated fighters of the Second World War. During the conflict, its pilots claimed thousands of enemy aircraft destroyed. It served not only with the U.S. Army Air Forces, but also with the RAF and numerous Allied nations. After 1945, the Mustang continued flying, even into the jet age, serving in Korea under the designation F-51 and remaining in foreign air forces for decades. Today, hundreds still fly as restored warbirds. The distinctive roar of the Merlin engine, the sound that once echoed over Berlin, can still be heard at airfields around the world. And in archives, the reports of pilots like Walter Wolfram endure, professional evaluations written by men who understood that respecting an enemy's machine was not weakness, but honesty. Wolfram found the Mustang's cockpit disorienting after the tight confines of his 109. The controls felt distant. The space felt unfamiliar, but he called it a fine airplane to fly. From a man who had shot down 137 aircraft, survived 4 wounds, and endured 12 emergency landings, that quiet praise carried weight. It was, perhaps, the most damning verdict of all. The P-51 Mustang was not just a fine airplane. It was the airplane that changed the war.